What's up, y'all? It's time for another primary source walkthrough. This time, we are going to be analyzing the quote-unquote shut the door speech. A speech given by a United States Senator who is from South Carolina. South Carolina always get problems. Anyway, that's more of a History 1301 joke than it is a History 1302 joke. South Carolina started the Civil War. For real. I have to give them crap. In any case, this is a speech about restricting immigration. And one of the lasting images I have always had of the 1920s, and this isn't quite correct, is the bustling Ellis Island, just immigrant after immigrant coming in and being welcomed and sailing past the Statue of Liberty. I mean, from my childhood, it was this animated movie, maybe you've seen it, called The American Tale, or An American Tale. I forget which word it is, but Fievel the Mouse, man, like, that's what I pictured for the 1920s. And the truth of the matter is that the 1920s is a time of significant immigration restriction. And there are a number of reasons for this, like the introduction points out. A lot of this has to do with World War I and kind of suspicions of foreigners in general. Some of it has, and a lot of it has to do with racism. And if you look at who's being excluded, focused on here, we see Southern and Eastern Europeans and the whiteness of people from like Italy and people from the Slavic countries. You know, really a unquestioned idea. It's complicated. In any case, in the 1920s, we see some pretty significant immigration restrictions. So, as the introduction points out, in 1921, we get something called the Quota Act of 1921, which limits immigrants from each nation to 3% of that nationality's present population as recorded census. So what it's saying is, only so many people from Italy, for example, can come into the United States. So only a total of 3% of the population, total population of the United States, according to the 1910 census, only 3% can be Italian, only 3% can be Bulgarian, only 3% can be Mexican. And as time goes on, in 1924, another Immigration Act is passed. And the bottom line is the 1920s is for all that it is, and something that we don't talk about very much in American history, at least at some levels of education, is just how much of a racist decade the 1920s was. There is some really significant things to talk about. And the chapter, I think, speaks to this, not just in terms of immigration, but the 1920s is when we see a resurgence of the Klan. We see more lynchings. Part of this is in reaction to the Great Migration. There's all kinds of stuff going on. The 1920s is when we see forced sterilization at its peak. We see bona fide eugenics movements during the 1920s in the United States. So much so that this Austrian dude who runs this country called Germany and has a stupid mustache and is a big piece of shit looks at the United States and goes, man, like, they've got it figured out. They really know what they're doing over there in terms of making their population as good as it can be, in terms of its whiteness is what Hitler's really thinking about. He may not have articulated those ideas quite that dramatically at the beginning of the 1920s, but certainly by the end of the 20s and into the 30s, he was definitely pursuing those ideas. In any case, this speech is all about immigration and why immigration is a problem for the United States. And the senator from South Carolina, whose name is Ellison Durant Smith, is saying we need to shut the door. And by shut the door, he means we need to stop all immigration to the United States. Not just some immigration from some places. No, we need to stop it all. No immigrant should be welcome here. And he gives us his reasons for why. Part of which, he goes in up here, he's talking about how World War I really showed us the danger that we were in. That, we didn't know who we could trust. We were letting Germans in, and yet we were at war with Germany. Why would we do that? He starts talking about why the United States is special. He's really taken that American exceptionalism idea up to 11 here. And then he starts getting into his racist nonsense. So, he is talking about how down here that foreign influence is going to make the United States weak, that we won't have the best and true Americans if we allow people from elsewhere to come in. I forget if it's here or down here or on the other page, but he says something along the lines of, we are a melting pot, but now immigration is melting the pot of America. It's a really bad play on words, and he should be very ashamed of himself. In any case, towards the bottom of the first page, he just goes straight into pure and unadulterated white supremacy. There's no other way to put it. He's talking about people as breeds, and here he just lays it all out for us. He says, thank God we have in America perhaps the largest percentage of any country in the world of the pure, unadulterated Anglo-Saxon stock. Certainly the greatest any nation in the Nordic breed. Folks, when somebody says Anglo-Saxon in this context, they don't mean people who lived in what we call England in the 10th century. What they mean are white people. So he's saying, here in America, we have the greatest percentage of pure whiteness anywhere. If we are going to let people from outside in, he continues on down here, that's going to pollute us. I mean, that's just some straight up eugenic white supremacist bullshit. But there he is saying it. He continues. He's riffing on these ideas a little bit more, and since we're getting closer to 10 minutes, I'm not going to go through this bit by bit. But what he's getting at in these paragraphs here is he's talking about how industrialization has made this really apparent. That we, as a new industrial nation, he says, the last 50 years, so, do the math, we're going back to 1870, that's post-Civil War, we're right in the middle of Reconstruction, and, the factory systems are really starting to rear up and go. I mean, think about what we talked about with the Second Industrial Revolution at the beginning of the semester, and that's what he's referring to. And he's saying, look, that showed us that we have to be careful because we've brought in all of these immigrant workers to help man our factories, and they're bringing us down. They're again, to kind of play on his idea, he's saying they're kind of polluting our pool here. We've got to make sure that we're being very, very careful. He says, in fact, we have population enough as it is now, without throwing wide our doors and jeopardizing the interests of this country by pouring into it men who willingly become the slaves of those who employ them in manipulating these forces of nature, right? That is industrialization. And they few reap the enormous benefits that accrue therefrom. So, it's immigration that he's saying that's allowing these big fat cat industrialists to really take over. It's a weird idea to blame immigrants for the rise of an oligarchy, but here's doing it, or if not an oligarchy, an aristocracy, a rule of rich people. So he says, shut the door, close it all off. In closing, I would rather see American citizenship refined to the last degree in all that makes America what we hope it will be than to develop the resources of America at the expense of the citizenship of our country. We can't let anyone else in. If we do that, we're risking what it means to be an American. And I would rather see us not be industrialized and see us not develop all of these resources like steam and coal and everything else than to pollute our Anglo-Saxon stock. That's what he's saying. It's really racist. But here is an example of what anti-immigration looks like in the 1920s. Now, a lot of the senators probably don't agree with everything that Mr. Smith here has to say, but do know that this 1924 Immigration Act did pass. It doesn't shut the door completely, but it continually restricts immigration. And that's not going to be revised again until the 1960s. Now, that's not to say that the United States had pretty interesting ideas as far as how to get immigrant labor into the country. But we're going to talk about that when we talk about the 1930s and the Depression. And we talk about, in particular, the repatriation of Mexican immigrants. A very painful story. To be completely clear, but something that we will have to wrestle with. So I hope this walkthrough has helped you understand the shut the door speech. As much as we want to dismiss it as just racist and not worthy of reading and understanding, it's worth reading and understanding because we have to understand the politics of the 20s to really evaluate the 1920s as a decade. And I want you to see this darker underbelly so that you don't romanticize the 1920s unnecessarily. I mean, it's all good to think of flappers and all of that sort of stuff, but know that there's another America completely, or actually some other Americas that we have to take stock of. So, all that said, we're going to wrap this one up. We'll be back for some more less heavy material with our next primary source. Until then, keep reading and keep analyzing. You guys are doing great, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in.